Hello! This and the next two lectures are dedicated to examination of ethnographic interviews, the user research method proposed by Cooper Design Agency. You may wonder why I choose to discuss this particular method. There are two reasons. Firstly, the skill of asking right questions and asking them right is generally applicable to not only a situation of an interview, but also to many different user research methods like field visits, usability testing, diary studies, survey, and so on. Secondly, despite the fact that pure interviews as a technique to study context of use has their limitations, it can be used in most projects, even if it's not possible to catch a user during the time of interaction with a mobile app. A user research interview is a conversation between a researcher taking the role of the interviewer and a participant taking the role of interviewee, aimed at eliciting information in which the researcher is interested. The interviewer leads a conversation by asking questions. The interviewer takes time to respond and sometimes asks for clarifications. Unlike other types of interviews, like job interviews, user research interviews are a kind of non-directive interviews, what means that interviewer's job is to minimize bias of the question she asks and the way in which she asks them, on the interviewee's point of view. In general, user research interviews may take place in fields, that is, where the interaction happens, in your office, usually referred to as a lab, or can be conducted remotely, using, for example, Skype or any other video conferencing software. All these options have their pros and cons. Field interviews will give you the most data, not only because you may observe interactions with existing tools being used, but also because of clues from the environments in which the interaction occurs. Remote interviews are the least generous on data because of the absence of physical presence and restrictions that it imposes to communications. Lab interviews are somewhere in the middle. On the other hand, field interviews are more resource-consuming due to logistics issues. You have to get there, in opposite to two other kinds of interviews, where participants come to you or nobody goes nowhere. There are different types of interviews that range from structured to unstructured, also referred to as in-depth interviews. In structured interviews, all questions are known beforehand, and the sequence of the questions is fixed. An interviewer is not allowed to deviate from this sequence. Basically, a session of a structured interview looks like the completion of a questionnaire read out loud. This type of interview is not applicable in our practice. Semi-structured interviews are conducted on the basis of loose structure. An interviewer follows a topic guide that consists of open-ended questions. She may deviate from the topic guide by asking additional questions according to the course of the conversation. In-depth interviews go even further. In this kind of interviews, a topic guide may not be used, or may just have a few broad questions on it. An interviewee's answers to this question determine the course of the conversation and the choice of the following questions. Mixing different user research methods may allow you to overcome their shortcomings as individual entities. Make your research questions rule a ball. Cooper's ethnographic interviews are a very successful example of such a mixture. Ethnographic interviews are a combination of qualitative research interviews and observational field visits. Cooper's staff proposed this method by drawing on a particular kind of field visits called contextual inquiry. Ethnographic interviews shift the focus of the study from user tasks and work structure to user goals. They also make the method more suitable to apply in consumer domains. Ethnographic interviews allow to cover the classes of research questions presented on this slide. They enable you to gather data to inform design decisions on both the what and how levels. Despite the fact that ethnographic interviews allow to gather data about problems perceived by users of an existing app, barriers and workarounds, actual behaviors and environments, there are other user research methods that allow to get more detailed answers to these classes of research questions. For instance, the analysis of user feedback will provide you with more data on perceived problems than any number of ethnographic interviews. The reason for this is quite clear. The fact that you are in the natural habitat of the users and may embed the interaction with a current version of a product or competitors into the study adds a whole new layer of data in comparison with pure interviews. But it also means a lower level of immersion into users' work and life in comparison to pure field visits. Sections of ethnographic interviews are shorter than those of contextual inquiry and usually last no more than an hour and a half, so you do not have enough time to explore the usage of a particular app in depth. Barriers and workarounds, actual behaviors and environments are still here, but they are not in a focus. The last feature of ethnographic interviews that I would like to point out here is a sample size. Alan Cooper and his colleagues recommend to have about 5 participants per user group for enterprise domain. But of course, it's just an estimation. During the study, you may find that the initial segmentation of the target audience was wrong, and you need to increase the number of participants for some groups. Consumer products typically have much more variation in users' behavior. Therefore, it's a good idea to recruit more participants per group. To sum up, ethnographic interviews combine such methods as interviews and field visits. It's a purely qualitative method that can be applied to study the usage context of consumer and enterprise mobile apps. They are extremely useful at the beginning of the project, when you need to make yourself familiar with the app's subject domain and investigate user needs. They are less time-consuming than pure field visits and provide more diverse data than pure interviews. Sample sizes used in ethnographic interviews are small, so no quantitative data at all. Thank you. See you in the next lecture.